Hi and welcome to MIG. Today I'll be showing you our third haircut of our collection series. This is Ella. Ella has a classic little bob. We had discussed that the front of her hair was shorter than the back, so we decided to keep the length at the front and work with some shorter pieces and graduation through the back. She's got nice straight hair with a slight kink as it starts to get longer. After I shampooed, I always blow dry my fringe. I use a comb to get it flat so it doesn't give it too much volume to stop it from having an 80s look. And then I'm making sure that I go through with a round brush just to smooth it out and get those ends. I do this first just so that I don't have to deal with any cowlicks or hairline problems later on. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to section it up. I'm going to go straight down the center and I'm going to work with the thicker part of my comb and making sure that the lines are nice and clean. I'm then going to work on a slightly diagonal forward section and clip that hair out of the way. If I had really thick hair, my section would be thinner, but as I'm dealing with finer hair types, it's a little bit bigger. I'm going to do this on both sides. And then I'm going to cut in my length first. I find for hairdressers who are beginners, sometimes this is the best way to get a feel for the haircut and how short you want to go through the back. Our previous haircut did have some different length arrangements in it, so I'm going to just even everything up. I'm following my sections and I'm just working slightly diagonally forward. I am cutting it on the skin so that I create no graduation. As is the first part of my haircut, I do fluff around a bit and make sure that it's perfect, because if my guideline's out at the start, it'll be out the whole way through the haircut. This is not always necessary when you're a trained hairdresser and have been hairdressing for a long time. I just find it's the first bit for anyone who's new to cutting and just getting their confidence. Always checking to make sure that it's balanced. I'm then going to continue in the same motion all the way up through the head. Diagonal forward will give me a diagonal forward look within the end result, which is what I'm after. If I did horizontal lines, then I'd end up with more of a horizontal bob. It just depends how the client wants to wear their hair and what kind of length arrangement they're after. I'm just following the straight line that I created before and cutting directly on my guide. Cutting on the skin can be a little bit difficult, so you can cut it through your fingers if you feel more comfortable. Just remember, if you cut things through your fingers, you do elevate the hair and create graduation. So sometimes practice makes perfect. This is just the best way that I find to get a nice straight line. I'm continually moving my client around and always having a good look at what's going on to make sure that it's nice and perfect. I'm continuing the same sectioning pattern as I was doing before. I'm lucky that Ella has really nice straight hair and it just does what I want it to do. I work with all my bobs from wet to dry, as I find if I was to cut my bob when it was dry, it can jump up and do things when they wash it and do things again. I just find that I have to see things wet, dry it, and then I go through and play around with it after. As I start to move up the head, I'm making sure that I'm always wetting the hair down so it doesn't dry out. And I'm also going to start to use my comb. Cutting through the comb, I do find can be one of the hardest techniques when cutting hair, but it just gives me such a precise line to follow. Ella's head is slightly tilted forward as well, and this will just help with the elongation of the line. So you can see my line has a little point in the middle, which is basically where the parts of the diagonal forward meet. So that's the look that I'm after. If your client didn't want that, you could just square it off. It just really depends on the first parts that you've taken. I'm going to keep working up the head, and as you see, the further I get up, the less hair there is to cut off. This is that she used to have previous layers. You can see that Ella has such nice straight hair, so it's so easy for me to see my line. I'm not putting a lot of tension on the hair either, I'm just allowing it to fall naturally. If I was to overstretch, then you'll get jumps and bumps, and this won't be present while you're cutting, it'll happen and be very visible once you've blow dried. Always checking for balance as you go. I can do this visually, and I also like to do this through feeling. So I've dropped my last section down, and I'm just having a really good look at how it's sitting first and making sure that my crown's not disturbing the line. So always giving it a bit of a shake before you start cutting. It'll give you a good visual guide of what to do. I'm cutting the back first before I move on to the sides, as I find cutting the back of the hair a little bit easier, so I'm not having to deal with ears and that. So I make sure my line's perfect at the back before I start to move on to the sides. As you can see, when I'm combing it down, I'm going to use my comb. That'll give me the lightest tension possible, and there's not an awful lot to get cut off through there. I am keeping the line diagonally forward. That front little hairline, he's not going to reach, as they've been chemically broken. I do like to call these quitters. I always tap over the ear. This will release the tension and make sure I don't have a jump when cutting solid over the ear. I always blow dry my hair to make sure that I check it, so I wouldn't just cut it and then leave it be. So I finished my solid, and now I'm going to work through some stationary graduation through the back. I'm going to divide the hair into two, and I'm going to work on diagonal forward sections again. This whole haircut is about diagonal forward sections. I'm working just underneath the occipital bone, as this is where I want to start the build-up of weight. My diagonal forwards are very strong, as I really want my graduation just to be tucked in at the back. I don't want it to be too classic, not like a classic graduated bob. This is just a softer look. I'm then taking my first section through the center. It'll be about the width of my comb, and I'm going to comb it straight out of the head at 45. I'm sectioning the sides out first so I can see what I'm doing and that it looks neat and I don't get lost in a lot of hair. So you can see that this is my first center guide, and this is the first bit that I'm going to cut. I'm directing it down at 45, and I'm going to take that little corner off. Graduation means a build-up of weight, so it's going from shorter to longer. I am blunt cutting or club cutting this. I'm not point cutting this. As this is quite a classic haircut, I want to make sure that my lines are sharp. Once I've done that, I then direct the rest of the hair into the center and working again on that diagonal forward. So I cut the center, then I direct the sides over. This is called shifting or over direction. By doing this, you increase in length from where you're shifting from. On the opposite side, I'm going to do a repeat of what I've just done. So I'm directing that whole side section into the middle. I always check to make sure that I can see my guide before I cut it. I do spend a bit of time on this first section, as this is going to make the whole haircut. If this is out, the whole thing is out. So this is where you should spend your time. If it's not perfect, go back over and fuss a little bit with it. So you can see the graduation is only small. It just gives that nice little tucked in look. As sometimes I find solid bobs can be a little bit bulky at the back. This will just shape and follow the curve of the head a little bit nicer. So then I'm just working with more diagonal forward sections, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. It's actually quite easy once you get the hang of it. So again, just starting in the center, I'm going to comb the hair down. I'm not combing it too high up, I'm just combing it down and elevating it at 45 and matching my line. Then I divide that in half, and then I work on one side. I do like to clip things out of the way. It just makes it look really neat and professional, and I don't get confused with what hair I'm cutting. So you can see I'm cutting more hair in the middle, and as I get to the sides there's less and less to come off. Then I just do the same thing on the other side, a mirror image. I work from side to side. I would never complete one whole side of the head before moving on to the other because I need to see that I'm balanced. Give it a shake, have a look, make sure she's perfect before moving on. So then my next section is going to come from on top of the occipital to the top of the ear. Again, working with diagonal forwards to create a diagonal forward line. As you move up the head, you want to be careful that your elevation's not too high, so always checking when you're combing that you're bringing it down to 45. Otherwise you can create a mushroom look, and it's maybe not the most flattering look these days, and it's not really in fashion. So again, starting in the center, about the width of my comb, and I'm going to comb it down to 45. I'm building up weight. So you can see then I'm just combing it down to 45 and cutting on my guide. And same again on the other side. The left-handed side of Ella I was removing a little bit more than the right-hand side, as she was a little bit lopsided beforehand. So for the last section I comb everything down, and I'm pretty much just going to comb it down and slightly elevate it out at 45 and cut on my line. This will change for different hair types and textures, but I was lucky enough with Ella that she had nice straight hair that I didn't need to fuss around with the top too much. So the same technique as I have been doing the whole time, this doesn't change. So you can see I'm following my guide, bringing everything down. Careful not to stretch the hair too much. This is where it'll jump and cause a funny little line. And then as I'm coming to the front, I'm pretty much not needing to remove much at all. If anything, just a tiny little point. And that's it. I'm doing the same thing on the other side. So just shaking it and having a look at the end, just making sure that you don't have any funny little overhangs and it's all looking even. Go back, cut more off if you have to. A lot of hairdressing is purely visual, so it's always a good idea to make sure you have a good look. Now I'm going to blow dry. Ella's hair was amazing. It was just straight, so I didn't have to do too much fluffing around at all. I just used a light volumizing spray just to give me a bit of a hold. I like to use a ball bristle brush when dealing with blonde hair, as I find it doesn't tug and catch as much as metal brushes do, but this is just my preference. Everybody's different. Giving it a slight bend on the ends, but nothing too much, as Ella is still nice and young. I get my hair dry nice and close to my brush, but I don't connect the two as much as possible, as this is called steamrolling, and this is where you can burn hair, especially fine blonde hair. I always give it a little shake through after I've blow dried just to make sure I get rid of any moisture. So now I'm picking it up and I'm just going to point cut the top. This is the area that will sit over the back and over the top. I just want to make sure that I don't have any funny lines and that it's even. I did find that Ella's left hand side did have a little bit more length, so I had to go through and fuff around with it a bit. Now I'm just picking it up and doing some point cutting just so I kind of make it a bit soft. We call this personalizing, as it kind of makes the haircut personalized to the client. It'll also allow them to have it grow out nicely. I'm going to now cut Ella's fringe. I cut this through my comb and I use a point cutting method. I use the comb just so that I have even tension, as I find my fingers can pull unevenly on the hair. I also like to do this dry, that way it's not going to spring up and do funny little length bits for me. I'm only taking a small bit off, as she was pretty happy with the length of her fringe. I tend with my fringes to work longer from the outsides and coming into shorter in the middle. If you're new to cutting hair, I would kind of advise you to cut the fringe first, as this can be the scariest thing when cutting hair. So sometimes it's nice to cut it first and get it out of the way. Always get your client to open their eyes and have a look and see where it's sitting. And just re-smooth and make sure everything's doing what it should be doing. Cool, that's it. So I'll just show you the back, just nice and soft. So this is just a soft little graduation. It'll grow out nicely. It'll also give it that elongated look. And that's the Ella. Thanks for watching.